Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Carmen Puliafito, and I'd like to welcome back to Retina Synthesis Dr. Andre Witkin, who is a professor of ophthalmology at the New England Eye Center, Tufts University School of Medicine, and also a staff retina specialist at the Ophthalmic Consultants of Boston. Andre, welcome back.
Thanks, Carmen. It's great to be back.
Andre has an important role in the world of retina because he is chairman of the ReST committee of the American Society of Retina Specialists. Can you tell us what the ReST committee is?
Yeah, absolutely. It stands for Research in Safety and Therapeutics. It's a committee that was formed a little over 10 years ago by the ASRS, and the goal really is to have another mechanism for retina specialists to be able to monitor safety of devices and therapeutics that come into market.
So, adverse event reporting, there are a number of routes for doing that. Can you outline those for us?
Of course, yes. So as people probably know, the FDA has a robust adverse event reporting mechanism. Um, it's called MedWatch, and really, it's a good idea whenever someone sees an adverse event, especially in newer pharmacologics, to report to the FDA. Really, the FDA is a non-biased way that we can track therapeutics across medicine, and it's been really involved with tracking adverse events. Um, if you look on the FDA website, on the MedWatch site, you'll see there's a specific form that can be filled out that's doesn't have any identifying information of patients, and the FDA anonymously tracks these adverse event reports, and then it goes into a system called the F FAIRS, which is the Adverse Event Reporting System of the FDA. And this is public accessible. Anyone can go on to the FAIRS website. It's actually really fascinating, and you can spend a lot of time on there. You can delve down into specific drugs. You can search by adverse event types. And this is it's a really good way to kind of get an overall view of adverse events of different drugs. But the downside is there's not really any follow-up mechanism by the FDA. The reports are put in by physicians and they're not really followed up. And so uh, events can be reported, and it's just based on what the physician says. And so there may be overlap of reports, and there's not really more specific information. So the other mechanism is also very important for adverse event reporting, which is through the pharmaceutical company. And pharmaceutical companies and the FDA are required to interact with each other. In fact, any adverse event that the pharmaceutical company receives is required to also be reported to the FDA. And they really work in close collaboration to track adverse events. In addition, the benefit of reporting to the pharmaceutical companies is that they have a much more robust mechanism to follow up with adverse event reports. And they can also do additional testing if necessary. Like, for example, they can look at manufacturing, or they can test the drugs themselves. They can interact with the reporting physicians and discuss different potential management options, or uh, able to do more testing on a patient specific basis. And so that's really a huge advantage in terms of reporting to the pharmaceutical companies. And so if a physician sees an adverse event, really the best mechanism is to report to both, or if you're going to choose one, report to the pharmaceutical company, which is required to report to the FDA. Now, the problem with the pharmaceutical companies obviously is that there's some bias, financial bias there. There may not necessarily be an incentive for information to be released to physicians or patients. And so because of those reasons, the ASRS has formed a third option for retina specialists, and that's really unique. There's not that many specialties that have such a mechanism, and that's through the ReST committee. And this is an optional adverse event reporting. It's not really necessarily collaborative, or it doesn't have to be collaborative with the FDA. In other words, there's no requirement for there to be an interaction when an adverse event is reported to either. But it's another option for physicians to look at adverse events. And really, over the past 10 years, there's been a number of scenarios where there have been adverse events with drugs, and the ReST committee has really been critical in reporting or collecting the data and reporting to the retina community about these different problems. For example, with Eylea, there were clusters of inflammation that the ReST committee was kind of first involved with, and sent out early reports about clusters of inflammation with that drug. And then more recently, there's been retinal vasculitis, which has been associated with a number of different medications. And really, the ReST committee has been critical in terms of reporting to the retina community about these more serious adverse events.
So, does the ReST committee interact with the FDA or the uh, drug manufacturers?
Yes, so absolutely. We have interactions with the drug manufacturers and FDA whenever we are concerned that there may be a new problem. It's important that we kind of share information with each other, especially with the pharmaceutical companies, because again, they often have better mechanisms for investigating adverse events, doing different kinds of testing, these types of things. And it's critical that the pharmaceutical companies is involved with the um, sort of decision making as to how to spread the information through the retina community and to the patients. And then, in some cases, if there's enough information, then an interaction with the FDA may be advisable because, the end result may be a change to the FDA label, for example. And certainly we have seen that be the case where retinal vasculitis has been added to certain labels, for example.
So, if you're a retina specialist, what's your first line of approach? The ReST committee?
So to take a step back, I think as retina specialists, we really use lots of different. Actually, one of the best things about being a retina specialist is that we are able to use so many different medications. There's a lot of innovation in retina. There's a lot of new medications that are coming out. We have a lot of different options for our patients. And what's important to remember is that every new medication, or even when switching a patient from one medication to another, there's always the possibility of having an adverse event related to that new medication. And particularly if a medication has just been released onto the market, there may be the possibility of a rare side effect. And so, first of all, it's a good idea to be vigilant for these types of things, to do a little bit more careful examination of patients when you're either changing to a new drug or starting a new drug. And then if you do see an adverse event, um, it's really up to the physician to report, but it probably best to the community to report through all three mechanisms. Again, reporting to the pharmaceutical company is kind of doing two things at once. You're also going to be reporting to the FDA in that regard. And then the third option, reporting to the ReST committee, is also become important in terms of sort of collecting information on a more personal basis. We have there's a number of people on the ReST committee that many retinal physicians may know, and I think people feel more comfortable reporting more specific information, or like imaging information, for example, whereas people may not feel as comfortable reporting such detailed information to the pharmaceutical company necessarily, or even if you report to both, just having two different kind of committees or organizations looking at the data in different ways is helpful. And we've seen that through many different adverse events where the ASRS is really primarily concerned on reporting to physicians and patient safety above everything else. And there's not necessarily the financial concern so much.
So, how does a retina specialist get their information to the ReST committee?
Yeah, definitely. So you can look up the REST committee on the ASRS. If you go onto the ASRS website, right on the front page, there's a button that says adverse event reporting. There's a number of different mechanisms there. You can also contact a member of the REST committee directly if you don't want to go through the form. But we do recommend that people submit a form just so it's more easily tracked that way. Um, excuse me.
And the society is able to take imaging and other information as well as just the clinical descriptions, correct?
Yeah, so we do recommend de-identifying patient information when physicians submit to our organization. What to go into a little bit more detail, what really happens is the report is sent to the REST committee chair as well as the president, and then a member, typically the chair, will contact the reporting physician, and we often have phone discussions or online discussions. And then if it seems like it would be helpful, then collecting imaging data and more patient information is often done.
So, what's the volume of adverse reporting on an annual basis?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes through waves, and it's hard to say like a definitive number. I mean, we see these uh, very frequent reports when there are new drugs that come out, or if there's a cluster of adverse events. Like an example of that would be with the BOVU vasculitis. There was all of a sudden like multiple reports a day when that first started happening. And then we may go through periods like right now where there's a report once a week or every other week. It's just kind of cycles, and you kind of we're kept on our toes, I should say. And again, anytime a new drug comes out, there's a potential for new adverse event reports.
What's the role of the committee?
I think the role is really to serve as a non-biased mechanism where people may feel more comfortable sharing clinical information. And then, the FDA also plays that role, but again, it doesn't go into investigating with it on a physician by physician basis. So it's hard to really know what to make of the data that comes out of the FAERS system. And there's a lot of data missing, and there's not really any follow up. And so that's really the main role, is to have a separate non-biased mechanism where we can look at, we can sort of delve into more specifics about a patient's course and looking for patterns in a sort of more thorough way.
As I have observed the ReST committee in action, is a couple of observations, rapid response and direct communication with retina specialists when an important set of events occur.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's really been a critical role, and we've seen that happen a number of times. Again, there's not really a great reporting mechanism that we can rely on. The FDA is very slow. Certainly, they do report to physicians on occasion, but often the signal has to be quite large, and often there's quite a bit of a delay in terms of communication to physicians. And again, there's not great follow up. So sometimes if there's a signal, it can be lost.
Mhm.
And then with the pharmaceutical companies, there's a bias to be very careful about the information that's released. And so I think the ASRS has really served a critical role in, like you said, sending out advisory reports or warnings much more quickly.
Well, the committee has great credibility among retina specialists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's constant turnover of the committee. I think that's one thing that's really helpful. We're very careful about making sure that we're as non-biased as possible, and we try to pick members that are from diverse backgrounds, both in demographics, but also from around the country, from different practice settings, these kinds of things. Um, and I think that that really helps with the credibility. I think if you look on our website, see who's been involved with the committee, that many of the times it's people that we know well, and I think usually a retina physician can pick at least one member that they've interacted with, which is a lot more comfortable when you have an adverse event to have like a more personal kind of interaction.
How often does the committee meet as a whole?
We we meet as a board. The ASRS meets as a board twice a year, and then the committee itself typically communicates online. On it's There's no regular interval, but probably a couple times a month we'll set up different kinds of meetings with many times with pharmaceutical companies. If some kind of event comes up, then we'll set up a meeting and discuss that with the company just to get more information about it. And then certainly if some kind of more significant adverse event signal comes up, then we may set up additional meetings if that's the case. But there's not a specific cadence for that. It just kind of is like as it comes up.
Can we go over some cases and series that the ReST committee has dealt with? There was the corkage problem. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. Coring is this was a something that came up last year that's was a surprise. And this is actually, again, another benefit of the ReST committee is that you never know what's going to come up. And last year we started receiving a couple reports of these unusual particulates in intravitreal medication vials, and the reporting physicians were very nervous and weren't sure what it was. So we set up several meetings with pharmaceutical manufacturers, and it turns out that this is actually a fairly common thing that can happen in any drug vial. When you stick a needle in a drug vial, sometimes it can shear off a piece of the rubber stopping, and that's called coring. And as you can imagine, that pushes a little piece of rubber into the vial and you can see it. Um, and this is actually one of the
Well, that's
reasons.
why I called it corkage, because
Yeah,
it's like corking
like a bottle of wine. Yeah,
and you get those particles in the wine. Not
exactly.
fun.
Not so fun for a wine connoisseur now. Um, Now, fortunately, we have not seen any safety events from this issue, and it's actually one of the reasons that many drugs come with their own filter needles, and it's recommended to use filter needles when drawing up medications from vials because that will filter out even microscopic particulates, let alone these larger particulates. But certainly, it's an issue that we should be aware of. And certainly, if you see a particulate matter within the vial, it's best not to use that medication.
So
Um,
this is the advantage of pre-filled syringes, of course.
yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the several advantages of prefilled syringes. Absolutely.
Mhm. Let's talk about retinal vasculitis.
Mhm.
Lots of attention and activities by the ReST committee in this arena. Can you talk about how it started?
Yeah, I mean, of course, retinal vasculitis is this kind of generic term that uveitis specialists don't like because it's not very well defined. I think for lack of better terminology, that's what's been used. But there's been discussion as to whether that's an appropriate term or not. But in any case, when we say that, I think most people kind of know what you're talking about. Retinal vascular changes, and especially retinal vascular occlusion, as a side effect of intravitreal medications. Uh, Really, the first medication where this was kind of identified or made note of was with vancomycin. This was a little over 10 years ago. There started to be these reports of very dramatic retinal hemorrhages and occlusive vasculitis, or HORV, hemorrhagic occlusive retinal vasculitis, that was associated with vancomycin during otherwise routine cataract surgery. And there were a number of patients that went blind from this. It was really potentially terrible outcomes. And since then, there's actually been a number of drugs that have been associated with retinal vasculitis. And now I think we kind of have come to the conclusion that it's a potential risk in any intravitreal drug. I think there's rare reports of many different drugs, but notable examples where it's been seen were in Beovu. Um, that drug was FDA approved in right around the pandemic, 2020, and very soon after it was approved, there started to be a number of reports that came into the ReST committee, and as well as to the pharmaceutical company, and they actually did a retrospective kind of re-review of the clinical trial data, and they realized that there was a number of cases of retinal vasculitis in the trial. And ever since then, it's kind of become well known that there's this fairly significant risk of retinal vascular occlusion and vision loss with that drug. So the use has really been curtailed of that drug, and the ReST committee played a key role in the early reporting on that. And then more recently, a couple years ago, right after the approval of pegcetacoplan, or Syfovre, there were reports again that came into the ReST committee and to the drug company about a similar kind of problem, hemorrhagic occlusive retinal vasculitis, kind of like we saw with vancomycin. And that was reported for the first time at the ASRS annual meeting. And that really kind of made people a bit fearful about using that drug. And since then, we've kind of been able to get a little bit more data on it, and especially the drug company Apellis has really done a lot of investigation in terms of the incidence, and it seems like it's a rare phenomenon. Unfortunately, there hasn't been like a dramatic uptick in these cases, but it is a potential possibility. And what's kind of interesting about, or unique, I should say, about those cases is that they tend to happen after the first injection, or at least the worst cases happen after the first injection. So that's a little bit different than with Beovu, where it could have happened at any time, and often after several injections, it was seen. And so the thought is perhaps there's some kind of innate or underlying immune um, predisposition to getting inflammation in the retinal vasculature. But yeah, I mean, some of those cases had really terrible outcomes, and it's certainly something that we're afraid of. The images are really striking and frightening.
If that cluster of cases, the incidence may be decreasing.
It's possible, it's kind of hard to look at incidents in post-marketing studies, just because you're really relying on physician reporting, and there may be different reasons why we're not getting the correct information. But from everything that we can gather, it seems like it's still a very rare phenomenon, and it is possible that the incidence may be decreasing because the use of the drug is going up, and yet we're seeing less cases that are being reported to the company and to the ReST committee.
Yeah, that's reassuring.
Mm-hmm. And then it's important, again, it's important to remember that we've seen cases of vasculitis associated with other drugs, with Vabysmo, with Eylea HD, Eylea 2 milligram Eylea, pretty much any intravitreal drug, again, there's rare reports of retinal vasculitis. And again, going back to the FAERS database, if you look on their website, you'll see that retinal vasculitis has been reported in association with pretty much any anti-VEGF medication.
Can we talk a little bit about compounding pharmacies and bevacizumab?
Yes, absolutely. This is a topic that seems to not go away. It's been here ever since bevacizumab or Avastin has first been compounded. One of the risks of compounding any and it's not just true of Avastin, it's true of any medication that is from a compounding pharmacy. There's risks of contamination of these medications, and they have to be very careful about the way that they're formulated. And there's a very specific designation that people will want to look for. And that is the 503B designation. It's a specific designation that's given by the FDA, where they do an audit of a facility and ensure that the sterility is of the utmost caliber. And it's critical, really, that the compounded medications that we use, especially Avastin, which we use in such high quantities, comes from these kinds of facilities. One of the indicators that you're likely getting medication from a 503B is that a patient-specific prescription is not needed. Any other type of facility, 503A or other facilities, require patient-specific prescription, and the medication typically expires within like 48 hours. And so when we're ordering Avastin in bulk, that's typically from a 503B facility, and any other facility is not really able to provide us the proper Avastin that we need. Now, there have been instances where facilities were improperly distributing medications, where they weren't labeling them properly or giving them an extended expiration date that they shouldn't have been. And, that's where it gets kind of tricky. So you want to make sure that your manufacturer is a proper kind of facility.
So there were a number of clusters from compounding pharmacies. Has that been a recent occurrence or not?
Well, it comes up. That's what I was, I guess, trying to allude to, is that it does come up. I mean, the problem is, one of the problems is that we rely on these big compounding pharmacies to distribute nationally. And if there's ever an issue or a shortage from one of those facilities, it makes retina physicians have to scramble to find other alternatives. And that we've seen scenarios where an improper pharmacy was used, and there have been outbreaks of endophthalmitis from those kinds of instances, and it's not something that necessarily goes away. There's been a fairly recent cluster that we saw.
Hmm.
It's just important to keep this in mind. I think there was a lot of talk about this many years ago when we first started using Avastin in compounding pharmacies, and then it kind of, people don't really talk about it anymore. But it's important to make sure that we're always aware of where we're getting those medications from.
Hmm. So to summarize, the ReST committee plays an important role in detecting adverse events and reporting them to the community. So if you're a clinician and you have an adverse event, can you review once again your options and how to get in touch with the ReST committee?
Absolutely. So the options for adverse event reporting when you're seeing some kind of problem from a medication or device is to report to the FDA. Number one. Number two, report to the pharmaceutical company, which in essence also means you're reporting to the FDA at the same time. And the benefit of the pharmaceutical companies, they can do some extra investigation. And then in retina, number 3 is to report to the ASRS. And the way to do that is to go on to the easiest way to do this, to go on the ASRS website from either the computer or your phone. You just click on the button, report adverse events right on the front page of the website. And you can fill out an adverse event report form. Another option, but not one that we recommend as much, but something you could consider, is just reaching out to a member of the ReST committee. And you can see all of our names are listed on the ASRS website as well.
Well, Andre, thank you so much for a very valuable and important discussion.
I really appreciate your time, Carmen, and thanks for inviting me.